You're listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a podcast where we explore what it's like getting older, the peaks, the valleys, and everything in between. In this season of Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, we're covering topics related to vibrant aging. I'm your host, Cheryl Proska. Let's grow old together. On today's episode, I'm joined by Nicole Bergoine, who is a registered and licensed dietitian and certified personal trainer. Nicole's experience includes working as a clinical dietitian, directing on-site wellness programs, and public talks. Now in private practice with Nicole Marie Nutrition, LLC, she offers nutrition counseling services to individuals, groups, and workplaces. In fact, Nicole has been my nutritionist for 8 years, and I've experienced firsthand the positive impact she has on healthful eating and lifestyle. Nicole, welcome, and thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So, Nicole, you're joining me today to talk about healthful nutrition, especially as it relates to older adults. So, to get us started, can you introduce yourself and share a bit about your background in nutrition, specifically related to older adults?
Sure. Let's see. I've been a dietitian for around 14 years now. I worked as a clinical dietitian initially, where I saw lots of older adults, sometimes for tube feeding recommendations or for really specific types of diets. Now I work as an outpatient dietitian, which in general has been my preference because I feel like I just get more time to get to know people, connect with them, and, educate them long term. As far as ages, I generally don't see a lot of children. It's usually mostly adults and very frequently older adults, only because it's more common to acquire type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure or high cholesterol as we age.
Can you provide an overview of daily nutritional guidelines for older adults?
Sure. The guidelines don't change dramatically, basically, between adults and seniors. But some of the basics are still to have a lot of fruits and vegetables in our diet, preferably at least 5 servings each day, and to try to have a lot of variety so that you get a lot of different types of vitamins and minerals. Um, Protein and lean protein is going to be an important part of the diet, but that'll be a topic that comes up over and over again, how protein becomes even more important as we age. We want to go with whole grains over white refined wheat products because you're going to get more fiber and vitamins that way. Calcium and dairy products or dairy alternatives are really important to get in enough calcium. Nowadays, most dairy alternatives, so things like almond milk, they usually supplement the calcium. So basically, you're still going to get calcium even from, products that haven't come actually from cows. And then as far as fats go, we want to stick with mostly plant fats and then also fats that come from fish, which would be omega 3s, just a very anti inflammatory type of fat.
So, one additional question, can you further identify plant fats? I just think for some listeners who might not be as familiar, that might be a question that would come up in their heads.
So basically plant fats are going to be basically fats that are coming from plant sources, but preferably unprocessed plant sources, especially so things like nuts and seeds and peanut butter and almond butter, avocado, olive oil and avocado oil. I get questions all the time about like what kind of nut is the healthiest. And Really, all kinds of nuts are going to be healthy. I'd say walnuts get a few extra bonus points just because they have some of those omega 3s that most people don't eat enough of.
And something that you taught me regarding whole grains is you have to look at the label and it has to say whole grains. It can't say like the enriched grains. And sometimes it does. And I feel like food labels, the packaging can be misleading. So what should we look for from your expertise on a food label related to whole grains?
Yeah, so one of the easiest ways to pinpoint some of the best products will be on the outside of the package. If they say 100% whole grain or 100% whole wheat, that means that like all the flour they used in that recipe was from some kind of whole grain. When you don't see that, then the next option would be to look at the ingredients, see if at least the first ingredient has the word whole in it. Because lots of
Mhm.
times people see the word wheat or like multigrain and assume that that's the same as being a whole grain, but it's actually the word whole that we're looking for. The other thing that you can look at is how much fiber is in there, since usually whole grains are going to tend to have more fiber. And for these kinds of foods, I usually suggest that people look for 3 grams of fiber or more in a serving. It is recommended to increase fiber slowly, though. So if you're not used to consuming a lot of fiber, more isn't always better. So you don't need to look for something that has like 10 grams of fiber. Start with like 3 or 4, and then if it's agreeing with you just fine, then it's, perfectly fine to go higher than that.
Is there anything else that we should talk about related to how nutritional needs may change as we age?
Yeah, so basically, our overall calorie needs tend to slowly decrease with age. So that's part of the reason that, it tends to be more difficult to manage weight sometimes. We just don't need as many calories. So we want to keep that in mind. Simply that metabolism tends to slow down with age. Sometimes nutrient absorption might not be as great as, what it had previously been. So there are some times where nutrients might need to be supplemented, especially vitamin D and vitamin B12 are two common nutrients that can be harder to absorb and are more common to need to be supplemented. We also see that protein becomes more and more important as we age. So, basically, to help maintain lean muscle mass, we want to pay attention to protein. And dehydration is also more common with age too. Multitude of reasons. Sometimes it's just because of small appetite or lifestyle. But we basically want to pay attention to how much water we're consuming as well.
What common nutritional challenges do older adults face, if there's any more to add to the few that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so malnutrition, basically, not getting enough calories or not getting enough protein can be a common problem.
Mhm.
Sometimes it comes up simply because of reduced appetite that can come with age, but also it can come from having difficulties with chewing or swallowing, issues happening with teeth that can make it harder to chew certain kinds of foods. And sometimes when a person is put on a specific type of diet, they might not enjoy the food quite as much. So then there's a tendency to perhaps not eat as many calories as they used to. So malnutrition is a common issue. Um, Again, the vitamin D and calcium deficiency and like overall bone health and the likelihood of having osteoporosis or osteopenia are two different issues that can come up a lot. I do usually recommend that people have their vitamin D levels checked with lab work when they can, um, because even if you're technically getting enough of it, since it's one of the nutrients that is hard for some people to absorb, even those who are taking a multivitamin or something, if you live in a state where you don't get out in the sun a lot, it's very, very common to be deficient. Um, Again, the hydration piece, and then chronic conditions are also going to be more common in older adults and seniors. So, type 2 diabetes and high cholesterol, high blood pressure, high triglycerides all tend to be more common conditions in older adults.
So, what are some daily habits that older adults can adopt to improve their nutrition?
Yeah, so in terms of preventing malnutrition, having regular scheduled meals on a routine is going to
Mm.
be important. Because especially if someone, let's say they're homebound and maybe they don't feel like they have a lot of a set schedule, or if they have any difficulty with like moving around, there might be a tendency to just skip meals and avoid cooking. So we at least want to have, planned meals, hopefully 3 square meals a day, and planning out healthy snacks when it's appropriate. In terms of water, it's recommended to consume half of your body weight in ounces. So, as an example, if someone weighs 200 pounds, that means that they should try to get around 100 ounces per day. I know those numbers tend to sound sort of high, so I usually have people start with at least 8 cups of water per day, and then once that feels like a habit, they can always kind of go up from there. Portion control is going to be really important for anyone with type 2 diabetes, and especially watching portion sizes for high carbohydrate foods will be important. But also, just because a lot of people tend to struggle with weight, they might need to watch portions in general. And most people don't eat enough fruits and vegetables either, which are lower in calories. So making sure that we eat enough fruits and vegetables. Um, and then regarding healthy snacks, so since protein gets more important as we age, I usually recommend trying to gravitate towards snacks that have at least a little bit of protein in them. Things like Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, hard boiled eggs, um, even foods like nuts and seeds and peanut butter and hummus. They don't have as many grams of protein, but they do still have some. So basically, just getting used to prioritizing protein at snacks.
Can you suggest a few swaps for healthier eating that older adults can incorporate into their diet?
Sure. So if someone's used to having a lot of white refined grain products, so this would be things like white rice, white bread, cereals that are made with different types of white grain. So for instance, if you have a food like um, Rice Krispies or something, and it's made with white rice as opposed to brown rice. Any of those places were able to switch over to whole grains and then get more fiber into the diet. And fiber is going to be an important part of heart health and gut health and keeping our cholesterol levels lower. I understand not everyone loves the whole wheat version of everything. So just try to do the best you can. And the official recommendation is to try to make sure at least half of your grains are whole grains. So that's a good marker to kind of evaluate from time to time. If you don't think that you're hitting that amount, then you can try to, you slowly try different brands until you find things that you like, because not all kinds of whole wheat pasta taste the same. Not all kinds of whole grain breads taste the same. Um, Fats are another place where we can definitely make some healthy swaps too. So, the kinds of fats that we generally want to limit would be the fats that come from fatty cuts of meat and then more processed fats. So, like things you might find in bakery items or like packaged foods. And the swap we would make for that would be, switching to more of those plant-based fats, doing olive oil over butter, switching to leaner kinds of meat so that we don't get so much saturated fat, which tends to make cholesterol levels go up. Even choosing like different kinds of protein sources altogether. So, like fish over red meat, or at least like lean, skinless chicken over things like bacon and hot dogs and sausage. All of those more processed meats are going to have more of the saturated fats in them. And of course, doing more of those plant based fats like nuts and seeds and peanut butter. um, Honestly, most people tend to have a lot more carbs than what they really need. So, although there's no reason that you have to get rid of grains, simply cutting back on the portion if the portion is too big and working on eating more fruits and vegetables in its place tends to be a common theme that a lot of people can work on.
Would you prefer to age independently in your own home or live at a nursing facility? I know what I'd rather do. Friends Life Care membership offers just that. Plan today for a future lived at home with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience while protecting your savings. Learn about your options at a free seminar or webinar. Register at friendslifecare.org/register or call 215-628-8964. So, a lot of the listeners of the podcast are living with one other person. So, they're in a partnered relationship, or they might be living alone. And especially for people who might be used to over the years cooking for a larger family, now there's one or two of them.
Yeah.
So, can you make any recommendations for how to make cooking for one or two people any easier or more enjoyable?
Yeah, actually, I've had a lot of clients over the years kind of go through that transition of, being used to cooking for a family and then, deciding how that's going to look different as their kids go to college and, life changes. And I always tell them, like, try to look at it as like a potential positive change in some ways, in that you no longer have to worry about cooking exactly what everyone else is going to like, and you get an opportunity to really focus on, your own nutritional needs or the nutritional needs of you and your partner. Because in general, I think it's more complicated worrying about cooking for 4 or 6 people when not everybody typically has the same food preferences or even the same medical conditions. So, for instance, if someone always had picky eaters for their kids, now you might have an opportunity to like throw more variety with your vegetables into the mix and, eat new kinds of foods that maybe the other family members weren't a huge fan of. Um, but in general, planning ahead is going to help, of course, because, if you want to cook, let's say, a big batch of something on Monday, then you don't necessarily need to be cooking every night of the week anymore if you can just have leftovers, or you can even freeze your leftovers if you want to. But basically, planning ahead is just going to help people with feeling organized and not being wasteful. And sometimes it's tempting to buy bigger amounts of things, to save money. But think of it like, if something might get wasted anyway, then that doesn't do you any favors. So basically, learning to purchase the amount that you really think that you're actually going to end up using which is highly dependent on just being organized with what you plan on cooking. And a lot of people tend to prefer like more simplified recipes, maybe picking things that have 5 or 6 ingredients instead of picking recipes with like 20 ingredients. In fact, there's lots of cookbooks out there that even go by the number of ingredients, or, when you're looking in like a recipe database online, you can specifically search for things like 5 ingredient dinner recipes and have lots of things to choose from. Because in general, I think most people are less overwhelmed if they don't have to buy a bunch of new ingredients when they're trying out a recipe. Um, and then lastly, using smaller appliances can be helpful too. So, like, air fryers are very trendy these days. I have loads of clients that are obsessed with them because the cleanup can be generally very easy, and the cooking process is just overall a little bit easier in that, you put it in the air fryer, you typically set the timer, it's going to go off when it's ready. There's just not a whole lot of work involved compared to when you're cooking something on the stove top. But also, the air fryer only holds so much. So if you're only cooking for like 1 or 2 people, you're going to be more likely to be able to, fit the whole meal in there compared to if someone's cooking for a family of 6, you have to get a really big air fryer to do that. Um, and then you've also have, of course, like the slow cookers and other kinds of appliances like that, where it's easier to, cook smaller amounts if you want to, can even save on overall like electricity compared to heating up the entire oven as well.
One additional thing that you taught me that's been helpful is to have my master list of meals. For me, it's dinners. So if I am planning my grocery shopping, I can refer to, here are, for example, the 25 meals that we like to cook, and then I can pick and choose from there, and it just makes it so much easier to then do my planning and execution throughout the week. So I want to share that tip that you shared with me with everyone too.
Yeah, yeah. So the master list is pretty much just where you start keeping an organized list of what your meal choices are going to end up being. A lot of my clients do it for dinner since that might be the time that they struggle the most. But really, you can have a master list for any kind of meal. So it could be breakfast options, lunch options, dinner options. And as far as how complicated or involved it gets, just totally depends on the person and their preferences. So, some of my clients keep like a bunch of recipes all together. And then for others, if you don't need a specific recipe to make something, so if you just know how to make it by heart, that means you can literally just put the name on your list. So it might be something like, baked salmon with asparagus and brown rice. And if you know how to cook that, then as long as you have that on your list, then you don't have to worry that you might forget that that's an option. And when you go to do weekly meal planning, it's just a lot faster because all of your ideas are collected in one place already.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, and I'd like to dive into it a bit more. Can you go over how important hydration is for older adults? And what are some good ways to ensure we stay hydrated?
Sure. So, basically staying well hydrated is going to be important for lots of different bodily functions and keeping the digestive system regular, and, for skin health. And it's very easy for water consumption to kind of go by the wayside. People tend to, forget to drink enough water. So again, I would say start with 8 cups per day. Once that feels like a habit, consider taking your body weight and dividing it by 2 so you know how many ounces you should aim for. And then for those that exercise a lot, you're really supposed to add another cup of water for every 15 minutes of more intense exercise too. So at the end of the day, basically the recommendations end up being relatively high. So in order to make that happen, though, um, sometimes people might, of course, carry around a water bottle with them, which can make it easier to keep track of how much water you're consuming. So, let's say you have your favorite water bottle that you can refill and it holds 3 cups of water. So, if your goal is to hit 9 cups by the end of the day, then at least you know that you just have to get through that at least 3 times in order to hit 9 cups. I do suggest getting the bottles that actually have a straw just because people seem to sip on them more often compared to if you have like a massive jug that doesn't have a straw. It's just so heavy that a lot of people don't think to like casually sip from it as much. So the cups that are popular right now with the huge cups with the straw, those are kind of nice. Um, if you get bored of drinking water, you can also make it more interesting by adding some fruit to it. You can do herbal teas, which many of don't even have any caffeine in them. So that means you can pretty much have as much as you want to, as long as it doesn't have something in there that you're allergic to or something. There's also like lots of different types of like flavor enhancers for water, and some of them are sweetened, some of them are not. If you're going with one that's sweetened, just keep in mind that the less you use the better. So it's nice that with some of these like squeezy water flavor enhancers that you can even just use a little bit of it if you want to. And then another option for making things more interesting is something like a true lemon and true lime. They're basically just like these little packets of crystallized lemon or lime or grapefruit, so they don't even have any additional sugar or anything. Yeah, they make it taste like you've put a lemon or lime into your drink, and they're just easier to have on the go, and you don't have to worry about them going bad, the way that you would with using regular fruit.
I wrote that down because I'm going to get myself some true lemon or true lime. And one thing that I love my soda stream
Yeah, uh-huh.
where I love carbonation, but I don't want to drink soda.
Mhm.
So, and I also don't want tons of waste with cans and bottles of club soda. So I use my soda stream. I love it.
Yeah, I mean the seltzer drinks that they have nowadays all over the place are great. Just because they make a lot of them, they don't even add any, sugar or sweetener to them. It's basically just carbonation with unsweetened flavoring. So as far as I'm concerned, you have as much as that of that as you want to as well, as long as the carbonation isn't causing bloating or, some other kind of
Good
issue.
point.
But they hydrate just fine though, and there's a lot of them that don't have any sweeteners, and they don't usually have caffeine in them either.
So now let's get into a few health matters that we know commonly affect older adults. So the first one is what dietary considerations are important for maintaining bone health?
Yeah, so the general guideline when you're getting your calcium and vitamin D from food is to try to consume between 2 and 3 servings of a high calcium food per day. So for a lot of people, that ends up being dairy products like milk and yogurt and cheese. But for anyone who is lactose intolerant or vegan, you can also usually get calcium from most of the milk alternatives as well. Sometimes it occurs naturally, but when it doesn't, they almost always supplement the calcium and vitamin D anyway in things like oat milk and almond milk and coconut milk yogurts, things like that. So the recommended amount of calcium to get per day is 1,000 milligrams for men and 1,200 milligrams for women. But vitamin D actually changes with age.
Hmm.
So for adults who are 70 or under, it's 600 IUs, or international units is what it goes by. But then that number goes up to 800 IUs when you're over the age of 70. Now, I meet lots of people though that end up needing more than that, whether it's because they don't get vitamin D from the sun or simply because, again, a lot of people don't absorb vitamin D very well either. So you end up with a lot of instances where people need to supplement, and doctors will prescribe very, very high amounts of vitamin D sometimes for those who have had it checked and have been found to be deficient. So that's why I recommend that, anyone who is suspicious of a deficiency, see if your doctor will actually check your vitamin D levels. And usually a good way of being able to gauge that is your overall energy levels.
Hmm.
Because when people have vitamin D deficiency, they tend to be more tired. So if you'd like your doctor to check it for you and you've been feeling tired, make sure you let your PCP know, I've been feeling tired lately. Maybe we can check my vitamin D or even my vitamin B12. Those are two of the, more common nutrients to be checked with lab work because they're such common deficiencies and because they make people feel tired. So a lot of times people will notice that they're just not feeling as good as they did before. And even though we get vitamin D from the sun, of course, we don't want people getting skin cancer either. And when you put sunscreen on, it dramatically reduces how much vitamin D you can create through your skin. So that's why a supplement ends up being the answer for a lot of people when it comes to vitamin D specifically.
How can older adults support their heart health through nutrition?
So, first of all, if you have any specific conditions relating to your heart, like high blood pressure or high cholesterol, sometimes there will be specific recommendations to help specific conditions. So, for instance, with high cholesterol, you're going to want to eat more fiber, and specifically soluble fiber is a type of fiber. That's the kind that you find in like oats and Cheerios. And it basically binds to excess cholesterol and bile in your digestive tract, helping your body make less cholesterol. Meanwhile, if someone has like high blood pressure, they might pay more attention to sodium intake and
Hmm.
keeping that lower. But the general guidelines for heart health, though, would be focusing on those plant fats rather than getting your fats from animal foods and processed food. So, again, coming back to the nuts and seeds and olive oil and avocado and the fish that have omega 3s like salmon and sardines. um, People are more likely to acquire high blood pressure if they have a really high sodium diet long term.
Hmm.
So, just being mindful of sodium intake is still a good idea for general heart health. And usually, when people have way too much sodium, it tends to be from processed food and dining out a lot. So, like
Yes.
restaurant food tends to have a lot of salt in it. And then a lot of your foods that are just packaged and prepared for you in advance, salt helps with preserving it. So, they do tend to use more of it. So, if you buy chicken that's already been cooked, there's going to
Hmm.
be more salt compared to if you buy plain chicken and you cook it yourself at home. And then lastly, just kind of the principles of like a anti-inflammatory or Mediterranean style diet are going to be, part of heart health. So that ends up being about consuming lots and lots of fruits and vegetables. Basically, the more the better, but at least 5 servings per day. And then other anti-inflammatory additions could be things like certain types of tea, like green tea, black tea, white tea, and then even certain types of spices like turmeric or cinnamon and oregano and nutmeg. So all things that you might either be able to use in cooking, or a lot of those can also be found in certain types of tea. So like you'll see ginger tea. Ginger is anti-inflammatory. So you can kind of sneak in some bonus antioxidants basically, by getting those extra spices and teas in your diet too.
What role does diet play in maintaining our cognitive function as we age?
So, believe it or not, the things that help with cognitive function really have a strong overlap with what helps with heart health
Hmm.
too. So, thankfully, if you're, working on both of those areas, it's going to be a lot of the same things that tend to be good for that. So, again, the anti-inflammatory Mediterranean style diet, and there are certain types of fruits and vegetables that are even higher in antioxidants than others, although all, fresh, unprocessed fruits and vegetables are going to be good for you. But berries and leafy greens will be, get some bonus points basically. Citrus fruits, because they have vitamin C in them, and vitamin C is an antioxidant and is anti inflammatory. That means that any of the citrus fruits are going to be good choices. And then healthy fats are a huge part of brain health overall. So, again, we come back to those omega 3s again. We're supposed to eat high omega 3 fish at least 2 or 3 times a week, uh, which most people don't normally do. So that's definitely worth paying attention to. And if you're not a huge fan of fish, you can also get omega 3s from the walnuts and chia seeds and flax seeds. Chia seeds and flax seeds are not things that you usually just eat by themselves. So they don't normally have like loads of flavor alone. So they're usually added to different foods. In fact, you might even see them like when you're going grocery shopping, if you go to pick out something like cereal, some of them will advertise on the
Hmm.
outside of the package how many milligrams of omega 3s they have. And they can do that by adding things like flax seeds and chia seeds to their products. But even if you're at home and you're having a smoothie or some oatmeal
Hmm.
or some yogurt, chia seeds and flax seeds can be added into a lot of miscellaneous foods. Flax seeds do need to be ground up, though, in order to absorb the omega 3s. So you either want to just buy them ground up or grind them up before you use them. Or a lot of people seem to like chia seeds a little bit better anyway, and you don't have to grind up chia seeds. So those are another option to just be able to throw into sort of random foods that you think they're going to taste good in.
Can you provide some nutrition tips for managing chronic conditions, for example, diabetes and hypertension?
Yeah, so regarding diabetes, first of all, you've got type 1 diabetes is the genetic version that we are born with and is usually diagnosed in childhood or adolescence, or even at birth.
Hmm.
And type 2 diabetes, though, it still has a genetic component, but it's much more influenced by lifestyle habits. So when someone is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, what we would normally recommend is to avoid having too many grams of carbohydrate at one time. I think a
Mhm.
lot of times people get really kind of concerned with sugar, and they have a tendency to just look at grams of sugar on food labels. But the reality is that most types of carbohydrate, once they're digested, turn into sugar later anyway. So that's why it's more important to consider total grams of carbs rather than focusing on sugar primarily when you have diabetes. And based off of multiple factors, so, your overall calorie needs and age and exercise, not everyone is supposed to eat exactly the same number of grams of carbs. So it is usually recommended to visit with a dietitian or a certified diabetes educator and to get personal advice about exactly how many grams of carbs you should eat. But as far as just general advice, creating balanced meals helps a lot. Um, because if you're just going to eat something like, pasta for dinner, the problem with that sort of meal is that you're going to have to eat a lot of pasta probably before you start to feel full. And pasta has a lot of grams of carbs in it. So, an alternative would be that you can still have pasta, but maybe you have it with a side salad and some kind of lean protein, and then you can more easily cut back on how much pasta you have, knowing that you shouldn't have too many grams of carbohydrate at one time. And typical portions, will range from half a cup to a cup, depending on exactly what food it is. And again, it can be customized too, depending on the person and what their calorie needs are. Um, Now, in terms of hypertension or high blood pressure, they recommend reducing sodium intake. And usually, the sodium guideline is to do 2,300 milligrams a day or less. But that number drops to 1,500 for people who have hypertension. Granted, you wouldn't know how many milligrams you eat per day unless you tried to keep track of it, which is an option, but it's also a lot of work. So, some general things that help with keeping sodium intake low would be things like doing your own cooking and cooking with mostly single ingredient foods, because then you get to control how much salt you want to add in the cooking process, if any. And when you buy things that are pre-made for you, a lot of them are just going to have salt added. Be really careful with how often you eat out at restaurants because there's so much salt there. When you have canned food, so things like canned beans, rinsing them helps because at least you're rinsing off some of that salty solution that's around it. Um, you can also purchase products like Mrs. Dash, you may have heard of before. It's just seasoning mixes that don't contain salt. So at least then you can use as much of them as you want to. And pretty much every other kind of brand has made their own version of that with like different salt free seasoning mixes. And then be really careful with condiments. So things like soy sauce, mustard, foods that are pickled. There's just certain foods that tend to be really, really high salt, which you can buy in reduced sodium versions, but you should still watch your portion to make sure that you don't overdo it. For anyone who is interested in knowing exactly how many milligrams of sodium they consume, you can use something like MyFitnessPal is a common food tracking app that's free that allows you to see how many milligrams of sodium you're having per day. It gives you other nutrition information as well. So it's not just for sodium, but that is, one way to be able to see sodium. Um, and the thing you don't hear about as often for blood pressure is that eating more potassium actually helps with blood pressure too. So basically, some of the foods that have a lot of potassium would be bananas, cantaloupe, coconut water, potatoes, and tomatoes. There is such a thing as too much potassium, though. So, you don't want to consume like a gallon of coconut water per day or anything like that, but having like an extra serving or two of some high potassium foods can be a good idea. And just be careful if you're on a lot of medications. There are certain medications where they recommend watching your potassium intake. Sometimes it's because the medication itself has potassium in it and they just don't want you to overdo it. But especially for people not on medication who want to help reduce their blood pressure, consuming more potassium and largely fruits and vegetables, tends to help with that too.
In addition to MyFitnessPal, which you mentioned, are there other books or websites or apps that you would recommend for meal planning or nutrition?
Yeah, so one of the ones that has been like my favorite for years was Cooking Light. You probably remember the cookbooks that they made in the magazines. And so they always had a website. I believe they were bought out by Eating Well, though. So now
Hmm.
Eating Well is a great resource, eatingwell.com, for lots of different recipes. And they have a really nice database so you can search for exactly what you're looking for. So if you have diet limitations, whether it's diabetes, gluten free, low sodium, they let you, search according to what kind of diet you're looking for. A couple other ones is like the Blue Zones Kitchen
Hmm.
by Dan Bootner. I can spell that for you. So just kind of helping with like a Mediterranean style diet. And then some of the basic ones like Mayo Clinic is a reliable resource. They have some recipes there. Besides MyFitnessPal, some of my clients like Foodducate. Basically, you can like look up different kinds of foods and how healthy they are. And then choosemyplate.gov is another just like simple but reliable resource for some different recipes and like educational material.
And I can search these recommendations and for our listeners, I'll link them in the description below.
Perfect.
Uh, so we are coming to the end of our time, and I do want to ask, how can listeners reach out to you if they have more questions or want personalized advice?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way to get my contact information is just going to my website, which is www.nicolemarierd.com, which I'm sure we can put in the notes.
Yes.
My office is in King of Prussia, so anyone who's interested in doing in-person appointments can see me there. I also do a lot of virtual appointments nowadays. And on my website, though, you'll see my email address and phone number. And, you're welcome to reach out if you have questions about anything. And, if it's things that are really extensive, you might want to consider seeing a dietitian so that you have more of an opportunity to work one on one with someone for, more personalized advice.
And finally, do you have any closing thoughts or words of encouragement for our listeners regarding nutrition and aging?
Yeah, so I think something to think about, just because I know it gets a little overwhelming if you feel like you have all these things that you're not supposed to eat for whatever reason. So I always tell my clients to try to focus more on what you want to add in instead of being focused on what you're trying to subtract. So, for instance, even if you're trying to eat fewer carbs because you were diagnosed with diabetes, try focusing on what kinds of non-starchy vegetables you can add more of to your meals, because then you just kind of naturally end up eating a little bit less, of the things that you're not supposed to have as much of. The other thing that I think is really important that we didn't talk too much about today would be mindful eating habits, help a lot with keeping a healthy relationship with food and also avoiding overeating. And so mindful eating is doing things like sitting at a table instead of in front of the television and really trying to pay attention to what your food tastes like and smells like. It's about eating slowly and chewing your food well. In fact, eating slow and chewing your food well is really important for digestion anyway, because digestion starts in your mouth, between chewing and the food mixing with saliva. So people just tend to have less issues with digestion when they're more mindful eaters. And eating slowly also allows more time for hunger cues and fullness cues to set in. So basically, when people eat quickly, they tend to be hungry. They order something at the restaurant and they're so hungry that, they eat quickly and then they accidentally eat more than what they really needed to feel full. And then we get that feeling of being overstuffed and uncomfortable. So eating slowly helps a lot with just learning how to eat the right amount for your body so that you can feel comfortable without being overstuffed. And it also just helps people have a positive relationship with food in general.
Nicole, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and expertise on the podcast, and of course, being my personal nutritionist. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, it was so great to be here, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you for listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a unique program focused on aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience. You can find links and show notes from this episode on our website at friendslifecare.org/podcast. Thank you to Nicole Bergoine for joining us today. You can learn more about Nicole and Nicole Marie Nutrition LLC by visiting NicoleMarieRD.com, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. If you like our show, please rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time. To learn more about aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience, subscribe to our blog at friendslifecare.org/blog.